And in honor of Black History Month, dozens of Tri-State residents gathered in downtown Quincy at Dr. Richard Eel's house. The landmark is recognized as a place where Missouri slaves seeking freedom would go for help. Helen Bunbury, wife of the late Quincy civic leader Ben Bunbury, gave her remarks at the home today. In the 1840s, Eels was president of the Illinois Anti-Slavery Party. He later ran for president of the Liberty Party.
Our youth didn't get it in school, and we have so much history that I think everybody should know our Black history, not just the youth and the adults. I think everybody.
If we don't honor history, of course, we're doomed to repeat it, not specifically in terms of slave trade, but in terms of realizing the freedoms that we have, the opportunities that we have.
Helen Bunbury also played a part in Quincy history as a special education teacher and longtime manager of the Jackson Lincoln Swimming Complex. She also worked with the Youth Achievers Girls Club.